on your notes, make sure you title it, and it'll be midpoint. The name pretty much says it all. Mid sounds like middle. Point is the point. So we're talking about the point in the middle. So the name pretty much says it all. So for starters, let's define what midpoint is. The midpoint of a segment, keep in mind I'm saying segments, midpoint of a segment is the point in the segment that is the same distance from both endpoints. The midpoint of a segment is the point in the segment that is the same distance from both endpoints. We cannot find the midpoint of a line because the line continues forever. We cannot measure the distance from one point to the end of the line. And lines don't have ends. So we have to do it from a segment. So as an example, you guys see my segment AB. And there's the point C in the middle. And I'm going to come over and measure it. I'm going to say the measurement of the segment AC is 6.84. The measurement of the segment CB is 6.84. Both of them are centimeters. So if you notice, the distance from AC, so looking at my first notation, let's notice how when I read this, the little m, I read it as the measurement of. So make sure we get familiar with that as well. The measurement of the segment AC, right? We know how to do a segment, how to name it. So the measurement of segment AC, so I'm talking about just from A to C, it tells me a distance, 6.84 centimeters. Then the measurement of CB, that means the distance from point C to point B, right? That segment is also 6.84. Therefore, because C is the same distance from A and from B, which are the endpoints, M is the midpoint, right? As is pretty much we expect. All right, the midpoint. Let's go into that again. Give you guys time to finish it. Also, like I mentioned earlier, and I just said it, but let me emphasize it again. The little m before anything stands for measurement. So if I write an angle, I'll say the measurement of an angle. So the m, like I said, stands for measurement. And like I said before, if you need to add some side notes next to it so you know what it is, please do so. Because the little m will be used a lot. All right, anybody still copy this? Okay, I'll wait. So just to read this again, the midpoint of a segment, so I'm looking at my point C, the midpoint of a segment is the point in the segment that is the same distance from both endpoints. The midpoint bisects the segment or divides the segment into two congruent segments. That's basically what bisect means. You divide it into two congruent segments. So the midpoint bisects the segment or divides the segment into two congruent segments. We used earlier, last week, I introduced you guys to the word congruent. What does congruent mean? The same what? Same one. If I could have a picture of my face, put it next to me, it's the same but with different sizes, and they're not quite congruent. So what does congruent mean? So, what do you guys think congruent means? Same shape and same size. same shape and same size. So when I say congruent segment, the shape is obviously a segment. Alright, we know the shape because the congruent I know the same size. Once again, congruent means same shape, same size. So the midpoint bisects a segment or divides a segment into two congruent segments. Sometimes we'll have the measurement, like in my previous slide. You guys have the measurements. Sometimes we're just going to have a little slash. You see my little slash there and my little slash there, because I marked them with the same mark. I'm basically saying they're the same size. Sometimes, like I said, I'm not going to give you guys the measurement in numbers. I'm just going to tell you they are the same because I marked them the same. Another way I can do this, let me do another segment such that C is also the midpoint, and I'm going to mark my two sides the same way. Do keep in mind though that on one side I had like on the segment AB, I had only one little mark. But since I had already used the one mark for my segment GH, I used two. So if I use another segment, I will use 3 slashes and 4 for the next one, and so on and so forth. And the reason why we do it differently, because if I also use a 1 slash for CH, for this segment, if I also use the 1 slash, I'll be basically saying CH and CB are the same. So if you mark them the same, you are saying they are the same. So that's why I mark them different. Like I said, get used to the little slashes. Those are just, I'm just telling you they are the same size. I'm not quite going to tell you the measurement. I'm just telling you they are the same. We're good? Alright. A segment can be bisected by a point, a line, a plane, and or a ray. So a segment can be bisected by a point, line, plane, and or ray. Word, once again, bisected. Bi means two, sected is sections, so 2 sections. Bisected means we cut it right in the middle. That's basically what bisected means. We cut things right in the middle. Later on, we're going to learn how to bisect a segment and even how to bisect an angle. Dissect, you guys have heard probably in your biology class. Dissect. You know, you cut. Well, here, bisect, you cut into 2. You cut it into 2 equal parts. Alright, so once again, a segment, the midpoint is a point, but through the center, through the point, could just be a point, could be a line, could be a plane, and it could be also a ray. Alright, let's take a look at this numerically. You guys see, probably you guys don't see my numbers 12, but there's my point in the coordinates, so that one are 3 pi. I have another point and the coordinates are -2, -3. So I have my coordinates, and I can come over. We know how to draw a coordinate plane. I know how to draw a segment. I'm going to find the point in the center. So my job is to find the midpoint. We're going to use this numerically. So let me come out with a formula. Our formula, or math equation, is going to be this thing at the bottom. For the x value, I'm going to go x1 plus x2 divided by 2. For the y value, I'm going to go y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So do me a favor, do write that formula. So just write mathematical equation. Don't have to draw the picture. Just write mathematical equation and then do write the formula. Real back, let's take a look. I want to do an example using this point. Remember the formula for my x value is x1 plus x2 over 2. For my y value is y1 plus y2 over 2. In algebra, we were introduced to this little numbers right here at the bottom. Remember, x1 means the x of the first point, x2 means the x of the second point. And for us to remember, our points are -2, -3, and then the other point is 3, 5. It doesn't matter which one is 1 and which one is 2. So for my x value, it says much is negative 2 plus a 3? 1. So I'm going to put this 1 over 2, right? Because I add my x's over 2. So 1 over 2. For my y value, add your y's. How much is negative 3 plus 5? 2. And let's write it over 2, right? It's always over 2. Then simplify your fractions if you can. I'm going to finish with 1 half and then 1. I want to simplify my fractions if I can. If we come over and we plot the point 1 half 1, which is there. Let me see if I can draw it. Can't really draw it, but you guys see it's right there. 1 half 1. Let me go back. So you guys see it's right there. That is my midpoint. So if I'm asked to find the coordinates of my midpoint, I will use this formula. For us to remember, this is the average of the x's, because remember in average you guys learned add them all divided by how many you got. My y value is my average of the y. The average is basically a midpoint. Any questions so far? Alright, now, lastly, let's take a look at this. Let's say I was to give you guys an endpoint and a midpoint. Right, endpoint is one of the segments of the one of the points at the end. The midpoint is the one in the center. I want you guys to find the other endpoint. Do me a favor, copy that information there. So let's say I give you once again an endpoint and a midpoint. Now I want you guys to find the other endpoint. This should be our last slide, so not that bad. Once again, give you an endpoint and a midpoint. Notice that the values from the endpoint to the midpoint change negative 10 on the x and negative 2 on the y. Okay, they change negative 10 on the x and negative 2 on the y. You can write that thing down as well. So notice that the values from the endpoint to the midpoint change negative 10 on the x and negative 2 on the y. Make the same changes to the midpoint, and you should get the other endpoint. Alright, I'm going to leave it, I just said you should get, because I'm going to write the coordinates to the midpoint. Once again, notice that the values from the endpoint to the midpoint change negative 10 on the x and negative 2 on the y. Make the same changes to the midpoint, and you will get, once again, I left it empty because we're gonna write the coordinates of the endpoint. And when I say they change, because in order for 3 to become negative 7, we go minus 10. In order for 6 to become 4, we go minus 2. So if I go negative 7 minus 10, because it's going to change negative 10 on the x, how much is negative 7 minus 10? Negative 17. And then on the y's, I know it's changing negative 2. How much is 4 minus 2? 2. So we should get negative 17, 2. Does that make sense? Okay. Not really? Okay, going back, look at what did it change from the endpoint to the midpoint. See how in order for 3 to become negative 7, you have to subtract 10, right? So subtract 10 from the midpoint, negative 7 minus 10, gives us our new exponent. Look at the y value. In order for 6 to become 4, you have to subtract 2. So now subtract 2 to the 4, and you get the new y value. And as a matter of fact, if you guys want to double check that that is the midpoint, you can add the x's and then divide it by 2, and it should equal to negative 7. Right? Negative 17 plus 3 is negative 14, divided by 2, it works. If you look at the y's, 6 plus 2 is 8, divided by 2, 4. Does that make sense though? Let me pass out the worksheet, that way we can work it out. Alright, so let's take a look at our worksheet. So for the first two questions, it says find the midpoint of the line segment. Let me make this a little bigger. Find the midpoint of the line segment with the given endpoint. So for my x value, let me remember the formula. X1 plus x2 over 2 for the y value. Y1 plus y2 over 2 for the y value. Alright, let's add the x's. How much is 1 plus a negative 7? Negative 6 over 2. For the y value, how much is negative 8 plus a negative 5? Negative 13 over 2. Then simplify your fractions if you can. Alright, I'm going to end up calling this negative 3 and then negative 13 over 2. Now the first fraction I can simplify, the second one I cannot. Let's take a look at example number 2. At the x's, how much is negative 4 plus 1? Negative 3. Let's also write it over 2. For the y's, how much is 9 plus 3? 12 over 2. Simplify the fractions if you can. I'm going to call this negative 3, 2, 6. So not that bad. Right, now, any questions for the first 10? No? Let's take a look at number 11. I'm giving it to you guys in a picture, but we can still find the coordinates of the endpoint. If you notice, one of my endpoints is negative 3, 4. Right? Based on the picture, I can tell it's negative 3, 4. The other endpoint is negative 2, negative 5. Right? Based on the picture, I can find the coordinates. Alright, so now we can do this. For the x value, I have to add my x's. How much is negative 3 plus a negative 2? Negative 5. So let's go negative 5 over 2. For the y's, how much is 4 plus a negative 5? So let's go negative 1 over 2. I cannot simplify any of my fractions, so I'm done. Right? Simplify any fraction if you can. Looking at question number 12, my coordinates are negative 5, 4, and 3, negative 1. Now I'm looking at the endpoint. For the x value, how much is negative 5 plus 3? Negative 2. I'm going to write it over 2. For the y value, how much is 4 plus a negative 1? 3. I'm just going to finish calling this negative 1 and 3/2. So in fact, if you guys want to graph it, it's right there. -1 3/2, it's right there, which is the midpoint of the segment. So not that bad. Yes.
So you have to use mixed fractions. You not mixed fractions. What is it called? Not mixed fractions, but odd fractions.
You talking about when there's a number and there's a fraction?
So you can
We
use
call those mixed numbers.
mixed numbers.
Mixed numbers, yes. What you mean with, like, for example, in 11, you're calling this -2 1/2, right? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we call a mixed number. So yeah, in order for you, if you want to graph it, yes, you're looking at mixed numbers. Right? If you notice the x value says -2 1/2, the y value says -1/2, so that guides me to my mid. So if you're graphing it, yes. All right. Any questions so far? No? All right. Let's flip the page. Now let's take a look at question number 21. All right, so I'm given an endpoint and a midpoint, and I'm asked find the other endpoint of the line segment with a given endpoint and midpoint. All right, in order, remember, I always travel from the endpoint to the midpoint. From 7 to become 3, what do I do to 7 to make it 3?
Subtract 4.
So subtract 4. So let me just come over and say I'm going to subtract 4 on the x. Let's just put it, I'm going to use this little bracket, this instead of parentheses, I'm going to use this little arrows. And I'm going to say for the x, we're going to subtract 4, right? So like later on, we're going to call this the x term. But for right now, let me just use those arrows. So saying for x, we're changing 4. What value? What are we doing to the y? 0. Right? We're not changing it. So with this, we're saying subtract 4 from the x and do nothing to the y. So looking at the midpoint, subtract 4 from the x, do nothing to the y. What do we get? -1, -1, -7. Once again, we subtract 4 from the x and do nothing to the y. So we finish with -1, -7. All right, let's take a look at 22. From the endpoint, looking at the x values, once again, I'm going to use the brackets. What do we do to -9 to make it -6? At 3. What do I do to 4 to make it 4? 0. I don't do anything. So add 3 to the x, don't do anything to the y. What coordinates do you guys get?
-3, 4.
-3, 4. Perfect. Kevin's not here. All right, any questions on your work? No questions? Easy.